And hello, everyone. Welcome to WD Carousel Podcast. My name is Ian.
And I'm Crystal.
And we're going to talk about a ride.
Yay!
I guess it's kind of rides, but it's all under one category.
Yes.
We are... go ahead. Do you have a thing?
I just said yes.
Oh, you said yes. Okay.
I said yes.
Moving on. We are talking about Pirates of the Caribbean today.
Correct.
And there's a lot to cover because it's a really big ride and there's lots of different variations and it's
So
cool.
like we've done before with the Haunted Mansion, and I'm sure we've talked about many other rides. I don't think that we've actually highlighted any other rides other than Haunted Mansion prior to this, have we?
Jungle Jungle
Cruise. Okay. So this will be our third spotlight on
a specific ride
or Disney
group of
ride.
Rides. Yeah.
And we decided that Pirates of the Caribbean, it's time.
It's probably time. We did talk about it in our very, very first episode, but it was revolving around one very specific element of the ride.
Yes.
So
let's get our bromine on.
I feel it. I smell it. Let's do this.
And let's just jump into
that water. And then they'll have to stop the ride to get us out, and it's a whole thing. They have new ones.
Oh my god, that reminds me of stories, but we're not going to get into that right now. Let's go into it.
So, if you live under a rock and you don't know what the ride's about...
What is the Pirates of the Caribbean?
Well, I'll tell you, Crystal.
Thanks.
Yeah. The ride is a dark water ride. So it's very similar in nature to, like, it's Small World or something to that effect, except it's themed more realistically and it's darker.
So if you want to compare it to the two rides that we've talked about, it is dark.
It's dark.
Such as the Haunted Mansion. And it is a boat ride like the Jungle Cruise. But combine those two together.
Just push them together. It's really interesting. The thing about it, though, that makes it a little different is it is a, go through the lazy river in the big boat ride, but it is unique in the fact, and I think it's kind of unique in most of these kinds of rides, that it actually has a drop.
There are a few other water rides that I can think of that have a drop. I mean, Maelstrom, aka the new Frozen Ever After, has a drop ride. Has a drop in there as well.
But it's definitely the first to do it, and it was built entirely out of necessity, as they wanted this big ride to be, because it's in the original version of the ride in Disneyland, it's in New Orleans Square, which worked really well for them stylistically because it kind of works with the bayou, and there was a lot of pirates in that area at the time. Yes. So it works, and they themed it out where you had the restaurant to the one side, and then the Dream Suite now is upstairs, and then inside is the queue for the ride. You go through, and you kind of go through this little kind of town, like a little shanty town kind of from that era on the outskirts of town or whatever, and that's kind of how you board the boat. That's the story, your way into the story. So it works really well. However, the problem they ran into is, of course, I think it was the Disneyland Railroad again.
Yes.
It's always the freaking railroad.
Always the railroad.
It's just
Walt,
like, he wants
we
the
love
railroad.
your railroad, but it makes designing rides a disaster.
The Imagineers are going to be cursing that railroad for decades to come. Anyway, they were like, okay, so we want this big, expansive ride with all this, all these different animatronics and all this stuff. And of course, this is after they wondered if they wanted to make it like a walk-through wax museum thing.
What is up with Walt deciding that he wants all of his rides to be walk-through wax museums? He wanted to do that with Carousel of Progress. He wanted to do that with the Haunted Mansion. He wanted to do that with the Jungle. He wanted to do that with this.
I'm really glad that they didn't. I just don't get it, Walt.
Wax figures.
Like, Walt, wax figures are creepy. Why are we doing... Anyway.
I mean, back then, it was something. Thank God they had the 1964 World's Fair there, where everybody was like, oh my gosh, those audio animatronics are amazing.
Right. So, so the 60s kind of turned the tides on what people thought was entertaining, which I'm glad. It makes me feel better, because I'm glad I get to walk through it. Yeah, we're pro that change from the wax museum thing. But anyway, so they had this ride where they wanted this big river ride to go through this thing, but the space they either had to keep it really tiny or they had to get it across the railroad track somehow. So what they decided to do, which was very similar to what they did in the Haunted Mansion, they just dropped you under the railroad tracks and took you outside of the edge of it to make it so you just had a fully subterranean show building. And that's what they did. So they just made a waterfall and ran you down the waterfall and back and around. And you get out at the end of the ride on a lower level. And then they just rise the boat back up to the top part.
I was going to say, it's also, if you keep track of length of ride, the Disneyland ride is still the longest, to my knowledge.
It is.
Version of this ride at over 15 minutes.
Yes.
To be able to get on the boat, float around, and then depart the boat.
Yes. And when they brought it to the Magic Kingdom, there was kind of one Imagineer that was in charge, and he kind of had to strip it back because a lot of it, I know, and what he had to do was, he basically, what they ended up cutting was most of the beginning in a lot of places. So there's some stuff that was padded out that they pulled back in the main boat going through the town part too, but one of the biggest things they changed was, at the beginning, you would start the ride by going through this kind of like bayou. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of the high reeds and like you'd like farmers out and like shanty
shacks
and like and very kind of, you start off and it's a lot less dramatic. You don't just jump right in. And I want to see that, actually.
And the reason that they did that, though, was because they weren't originally going to have a Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disney. Magic Kingdom.
Right.
Because they thought it was too close to the Caribbean, so everybody there's used to pirates and it's not Caribbean, a big thing anymore.
Right.
And they had already established the footprint for the rest of the park.
Right.
So they had to work within a small confine when everybody was like, no, where's pirates? We want pirates.
Right. So they had to just kind of make do. And so they dropped it in Adventureland?
Yes.
Yes, Adventureland. It's not Frontierland. It's Adventureland.
Across from the Tiki Room.
Yes. So they kind of, so for that one, so Disneyland, they did it that way, and you worked in, and they really kind of had it all set up in that way where it kind of worked with the exterior.
Made sense.
It made a lot of sense. So when they went to drop it into the version for Magic Kingdom, they're like, okay, so we're gonna put it in Adventureland. Good thinking, Fred. And then they had to figure out what to do from there, and so they styled it after a castle in Puerto Rico, a fort there.
I've been to that. Yeah. I love Puerto Rico. Sorry.
Yeah.
Side
so
note.
So that's actually, it's Castillo del Moro is based off of a fort in Puerto Rico, and so when they did that, so that's how they made it easier to jump you right in, because you started in the fort. And then you ride out and down the waterfall, and you come around it, and then you see the fort. That's their way of doing it.
That makes more sense.
Yeah, so that was why it tracks very well, and
it's still a great ride.
It is a great ride. It's a lot shorter.
It's half the time.
Yeah, I know that
still great.
We had some friends of ours that we went to Disney with some time ago, and he grew up some of his time in California, and one of his grandmothers lived just outside of Anaheim. So they would go to Disneyland a lot. And so he was really familiar with the ride, and he was so super pumped to do it in Florida. And then we get off the ride, and he's like, oh, that was really short. I'm like, I know, it's not the same. Yeah. Those of us that have never done the real one just kind of have to make do. But it's still a fantastic ride to do, and it's still one of my favorites. And you had mentioned bromine. We've talked about bromine water before, but in case those of you that are the uninitiated,
bromine is the alternative to chlorine, and it's a lot safer, it's a lot healthier, but it's a lot more expensive. So that's why you don't really see it as an option in a lot of public pools, but Disney decided a number of years back to have that as the way to cleanse the water, the chemical cleanser that they use for every ride, and therefore almost any water ride or any water situation that you have, their water parks and everything, use bromine, and it has a very distinctive smell.
And when you've walked into a Disney park and you're near like one of their fountains or rides or something, because you can get that, there's a bromine smell.
And one of the candles that we can get from the candle company that we've talked about before, the Pirates of the Caribbean themed one, smells like bromine. That's the main sense. Yay, chemical cleanser. That's the candle smell.
Yeah. So anyway, that's a little side note. So kind of just go through the ride, I mean, the basic progression is once you've gone through and the battle has started, now
is this the same for Disneyland and Disney World and Disney Tokyo and Paris?
Paris, I believe they all follow a very similar plot at this point.
Yes.
At the point that you've gone down the waterfall and you've seen the ship for the first time, that's more or less the same. Very close to. Some parts are either elongated or shortened, but there's not much that you see that's different. So essentially, at this point, you go through the ride, and the ship, I believe, was called the Wicked Wench. In the ship. Yeah, and originally it was all completely just, standard characters. There were no movie characters in the ride at that point.
They added those in 2006.
They've changed it a couple of times. I think 2006 was the first time they made additions to them, and
then they came out in 2003. The ride was changed in 2006.
Yeah, and then I think they've made even more modifications a couple of times since.
With their most recent one, that was our number 1 episode here. So if you're curious about We Wants the Redhead, what's going on with the redhead, check that episode out.
Yeah. But so you do the cannon battle between the fort and the ship, and then you go through the town, and at that point you're going through this ransacked town where the pirates are actively going through and trying to...
You're right, there was another adjustment on that one. There were a couple of them.
Yes.
So you, before, in the first incarnation, had the pirates chasing after women and being very... I wouldn't say vulgar, but
lecherous.
Very questionable with their intent.
Right.
And there was another scene where one of them had, undergarments of a female with a female inside of a barrel or something like that.
Wow.
They had the wenches scene where they are auctioning off women.
Right.
A whole bunch of incarnations.
Right.
They switched the pirates versus women chasing each other around, I can't remember what year, but now the women chase the pirates around
with a hatchet or something.
Yep, or a broom to beat them out.
Yeah.
So that way they stop trying to pillage their houses.
Right.
And the barrel scene changed to, I think Jack Sparrow's in it now.
Yep, Jack Sparrow's in the barrel.
A couple other things, but they also recently got rid of the selling the females area.
Yep. The chicken wench for a bride.
Pirate queen.
Yep.
Yada yada.
Episode 1 will give you some impressions about all of that. But so there's been a couple of changes, but at that point you go through the town being ransacked, and by the end you see all the gold down below, and the guys are trying to get the dog to give them the keys, very iconic. And then you go out kind of through the dungeon area, and then you come back to the exit zone and leave. Well, in the modifications, they've been adding these little vignettes that include characters from the movies. So you get some Johnny Depp, some Jeffrey Rush. They just kind of show up periodically throughout. To me, it doesn't add anything, honestly.
No. It doesn't deter.
No.
But
I'm not mad about it, but it's just like, I could take this or leave it, honestly. And I know there was a point in time for a while, you remember where they had Davy Jones on like a fog screen?
The mist window, yes.
Yeah. They got rid of that when we did it this last time.
This last time that we went.
Yeah.
But they also got rid of a number of features in that underground cave. So instead of there being the skeletons that we saw, there was also glass coffin that was there for a while that actually there was a mermaid skeleton down there too, which they got rid of. Those corresponded with the movies at one point in time as well, and then they got rid of that. But speaking about that room, there's rumor in Disneyland that there are actual human skeletons, and this is still just rumor, but they can be found within that section of the original Disneyland ride.
Yeah, I was about to bring that up. I think there is. Somebody said there's been a couple Imagineers that have been kind of shifty about it, but there's like one skeleton that is almost that's a person.
Yeah, in their entirety.
In their entirety, so an entire human skeleton, which seems really creepy, but honestly, it's not as hard to get those as you would expect.
No.
But
I don't know from personal experience.
I don't. We're going to leave that one alone.
I don't. I promise.
Anyway, so that's a rumor, but that's only for Disneyland. That's a thing.
Correct.
But yeah, the rest of the rides all kind of... Now, I don't remember about Disneyland Paris or Tokyo, but I don't know if those are more similar to the Disney, the Magic Kingdom experience, where you start at the castle.
They're slightly longer, so I'd assume that they wouldn't start in a bayou area.
Right.
Just because of time restraints. So,
right, so they're probably...
if memory serves, like I said, Disneyland's about 15 minutes.
Right.
Disney World's about 8 minutes. And I think Paris and Tokyo are about 10 minutes.
Okay. So they're probably...
not too much longer.
Probably more on the Magic Kingdom track, maybe with a couple areas that are kind of padded out a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, so that's kind of the basics of that. Now,
Fun little trivia on the original Disneyland, when they were trying to get approval from the sheriff to run the ride.
Yeah.
With the lighting effects of the fire, where it was the fabric and the fans and the lights and everything, the sheriff thought it was real.
Oh no.
And made them install an emergency shutoff valve for fans and lights. But for peace of mind, the sheriff didn't believe them that it was just fans and lights, and made them install an emergency shutoff valve.
For what?
No idea.
There's just a button that just turns off the fans and lights?
It has a big red sign that says shut off. I don't know.
Oh, that is really funny.
But that I thought was really interesting, because a lot of people hadn't seen that kind of special effect used before.
Yeah. Now, and this is peddling way back, but the reason that this ride came to be, did I mention this already? It was from the success of the movie Treasure Island.
You did not mention this.
In the 1950s. So, the whole idea was, when they started with the California project, that they wanted to have that Walt wanted the wax museum thing. Okay, Walt. But they did that because because Treasure Island was just such a big hit that whole kind of swashbuckling adventure situation.
The live action.
Yeah, everyone liked it. And so they were like, well, let's just do it. So that was kind
Everybody loves pirates.
That is actually, so the movies were inspired by
the ride,
which in turn inspired by Treasure Island. So just that's the original,
the life cycle.
The OG Pirates of the Caribbean movie is Treasure Island. So it's just kind of a little fun tidbit there. But interesting fact now, so coming forward, and all these rides were opened by about 1997. All these rides in this incarnation all the way up through Tokyo. Now, when Shanghai Disney opened, they wanted to do it again. But it was 2016, and I think that somebody just felt that was weird to do another one of the exact same ride again. So they decided, and they changed the name too, which is important, and I hope that I wrote this down. Yeah. So in Shanghai, it's called Pirates of the Caribbean Battle for the Sunken Treasure. And the other thing that's kind of important to note about this ride is it is actually entirely based on the movie franchise. So it doesn't follow any of the same plans as anything. It's all based around the narrative of characters from the movies.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever. I'm sure it's amazing, and it is supposed to be amazing. It uses some projection, which I know you're not a huge fan of, but it does have some. I believe Weta Workshop. Is it Weta Workshop or it might have been ILM? I can't remember which. But one of the effects houses did all of the special effects for that, and it also uses a different ride system.
Yeah, so they're not based on track.
There's no track and there's no flowing water. There's water, it's standing, and I may have mentioned this before in a previous episode, and I was incorrect. There is water, but the way that it works is it's actually like, imagine if the People Mover was in the water, and so it actually uses linear induction to pull the boats through, and the cool thing about that is not only is it that there's no tracks to get in the way, but also it can vary the speed.
Interesting.
So you could be going through an area, and then all of a sudden you could take off and to get around something. So it creates this very dynamic ride experience, like a Dinosaur or something, where you get that kind of jarring movement. You can move you around. I don't think it's jarring, but they can actually kind of move you through areas in a very dynamic way, which is really cool.
Interesting.
So it's something to be aware of. I don't know that I'll ever get a chance to go, but I think that it's an interesting fact that they want to continue to keep the dream alive of the ride. It's too bad that it doesn't follow the same pattern. It's just based on the movies, but it sounds like they did a very good job of making the ride unique and a fun experience, and it sounds like it's amazing. That was 2016, so that's only been a couple of years that it's been out. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the lowdown. I'm thinking there's more trivia in here that we're missing.
There is quite a bit more trivia, I'm sure. One thing that I read. Okay, so this is family friendly oriented. Mm-hmm. So parents, close their little ears for just a second. Okay, close their little ears. The water is not allowed to be touched. And what I mean by that is not only do they have the bromine in there, but if anybody, they have the disclosure in the beginning that you have to keep your hands and feet inside the boat.
Yep.
It is not just for any safety precaution, but it is considered a biohazard if somebody happens to touch the water with something. And what I mean by that is, people spread their ashes and all this other stuff.
Right.
That happens. The water normally gets drained out once every few months. But if there happens to be a biohazard contamination, they have to shut down the ride, and it can take 2 weeks for them to get it up and running again.
Okay.
So the story that I'm talking about is there was this couple people that were working, and they can see you wherever you are in the ride. It's dark to you, but they can see you the whole time. There is no place sneaky in Disney World.
Well, no, just never assume there is.
Don't do it, people. But there was a couple alone in their boat, and they decided to have some fun. And let's just say that the girl was helping out the guy.
Oh, no.
But didn't want to take care of it. So she's getting ready to spit over the side of the boat. And over the intercom, these guys, realizing that they're going to end up shutting down the ride for a couple weeks.
Oh, no.
If she does this, says across the speaker intercom thing.
No.
Finish what you start.
Oh, no.
And she just looks flabbergasted and swallows.
Wow,
okay, parents, there you go. There's your fun little story about biohazards. So keep your hands and your feet inside the boat at all times. Don't spit, don't sneeze, don't have cut fingers. Don't do any of that, or else you will shut down the ride for 2 weeks and ruin other people's vacations. Pro tip.
Don't touch the water.
Don't
put anything in the water. Don't spit in the water. Just don't touch the water.
Don't touch the water.
Don't touch the water.
Although it's nice that Disney actually will make sure that the water's healthy.
Right.
I mean, I have to give them big props for that. Versus, who knows, in other locations, in other events or whatever, how often water gets switched out.
Looking at you, Nickelodeon Universe. Just called you out for no reason. Sorry.
I don't know how often their water gets changed.
I don't either.
But, you have to give them big props because they are that hyper aware.
Yeah, absolutely.
That being said, Disney sees all.
Disney sees all. Moral of the story, kids. Disney sees all. That's the most inappropriate thing we've ever said on this show.
I think so.
Yeah.
You're debating keeping it.
I probably will, but wow. I'll make a note or something.
That's why I gave the close ear.
I know.
Earmuffs.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's.
I don't think we can top that.
I don't think we can. So that's Pirates of the Caribbean, the ride. And it's absolutely one of my personal favorites, for sure.
There is one other thing that we can add.
Yes.
It's the Halloween overlay.
Yes.
So this year, Disney decided to try something different. When we went down, we did not go during this time. We went ahead of time, and then we were intending to come back, but the line got pretty long.
Yeah.
And they essentially added live actors into the queue system and one inside the ride.
Yeah.
I think that is a wonderful addition.
Yep.
To the ride. I feel like they should try that more often.
Yeah.
I think it would make it feel more engaging. I think it would help suck people in a little bit more as well.
Not that it necessarily needs it, because it gets pretty busy anyway, but it would be definitely very engaging.
And it's just the newest addition to the world of Pirates of the Caribbean as far as the ride goes, and them trying to keep it up to date and revamp it and make it.
Was that a new thing this year, or was that something they'd done previously?
No, that's the new thing this year.
Oh, okay, very cool.
This was the first year for them trying it.
Cool.
And I heard positives and negatives about it. Primarily positives. The negatives are things like, well, there was only one person, or he was really engaged with one boat, and then once we got to our boat, he was still talking to them and then skipped over us. So we didn't get that personal engagement.
Probably need
which
more
is
actors.
why more actors might be a beneficial
thing. Yeah, they'll figure it out. Yeah, interesting.
It was a good addition. I think that is something that they should do more frequently.
Yeah.
But that is the newest incarnation of the ride. That is the history of the ride. And fun little story about the ride.
Warp. All right. Well, that was Pirates of the Caribbean. This is WD Carousel of Podcast. I'll get there. And thank you so much for listening. I'm Ian.
And I'm Crystal. And I hope you have a great, big, beautiful tomorrow.
Beautiful tomorrow. Just a dream away.